Welcome back to the program. Arkansas and Alabama are the only two states in the United States who force the inmates in their state prisons to work for no charge. Our next guest wants to change that. She's Representative Vivian Flowers, Democrat of Pine Bluff. Good to see you, as always. Welcome back to the program.
Good to see you. Great to be here.
What's at the root of this constitutional amendment you propose? Why is this even in our state constitution?
Well, it's in the national constitution as well. And it was brought to me. I think most people don't even really think about it or realize it like you read it, for those who even read the Constitution. And there's an organization called Decarcerate, also other supporting organizations like the Poor People's Campaign and yada, yada, yada. But it was brought to me by Decarcerate. I looked at it and I was like, this is never going to pass. And I didn't know this, you know. And so when you read it and you think about the implications of having our guiding sort of law of the land for our state make an exception for slavery, especially given this sort of original sin that we have tried, I think, so hard to overcome. It just seems to me that if we're really going to be a state and a nation that is committed to justice and fairness, one that completely disassociates ourselves with the enslavement of people, and also one that values work, I think we have to do that.
The counter argument that's going to come out there, just from my deductive reasoning here, is that we are paying the cost for these inmates to be in prison. There is food, there is health care, there is the cost of incarceration, not to mention they owe a debt to society.
For sure.
So what's wrong with that logic of them working for free to pay back some of their debt to society?
I obviously there is a cost. And I guess the analogy that I would make is there are tactics and ways that our military punishes, that the way our military holds people in confinement, the way our military gets information. But we also have decided that we don't engage in torture, right?
Right.
And so, you know, there may be a fine line for some, but if we decide to be a nation that stands as an example and says, philosophically, we do not engage in torture, then we don't engage in torture. That's on paper, and that's by action. Now, some people may say, well, keeping someone in a room confined to answer questions for 3 days is torture.
The analogy you're making is that we can keep them incarcerated, but we could pay them too, because they could be using that money to give back to their families in a way.
Absolutely. Right. We are a nation that does not believe in the enslavement of people. We don't associate that with being a nation that is just. And so if we're saying that, then there's no way in the world that I believe, and I think most people would believe, that on paper and in practice, we should ever have a line through the 13th Amendment or anywhere in our state constitution that says, you know, we shall never enslave people except for this.
It's the one exception there.
Yeah.
Besides inmates in prison, would this proposal affect anything else, or is this the specific
Well, I mean,
reason?
it says specifically about the exception that it creates is for punishing. And I think that we can punish and we can separate people who have committed crimes from the rest of society to protect society, and then still engage in rehabilitation. I'm not alone in one that is looking for ways in which we can effectively and efficiently rehabilitate, as well as find resources and make sure that we engage other parts, like the nonprofit sector, for reentry, because we know that we as a society suffer when there's recidivism. We know that we as a society suffer when people who have been imprisoned re-enter society and they have no money, they don't have skills to make money. And so, you know, I've gotten calls already and Facebook posts for people who are talking about these people have committed crimes. This is not about who is deserving. It is about who we are as a state, who we are as a nation, and then how we effectively and efficiently utilize our resources to make sure that we not only punish and protect society, but that we also ensure that we are being effective and efficient in the way that we send people back out into society among us.
I see that you have a lot of Democratic co-sponsors on this resolution, but I didn't see very many Republicans, if any Republicans there. Is this going to be a bipartisan effort?
I hope. And I would say this, to be fair, you know, we have caucus meetings, so you pass stuff around to your caucus members, and so it was pretty easy, but there's for this kind of resolution, there was a limit or a deadline by which it had to be filed. So I went on and filed it. I do hope that some of my colleagues join me. And, you know, I just had a conversation with one of my colleagues the other day about another bill. Oftentimes it's, you know, once you sit down and you look at the data and you talk about the issue, it's usually not a whole lot of separation. It's usually a whole lot of overlap, and it's not, do we want this, it's how do we get there.
Yeah.
And
so just in the essence of time, we've got to wind down here, but there are 3 potential legislative referrals that the Arkansas General Assembly can kick out to voters for the 2020 general election.
Yes.
Highways is clearly going to be one of the referrals. I would be willing to bet my bottom dollar there. There are, I think, 46 referrals altogether that were filed. What else do you think is out there competing for spot 2 and spot 3 besides yours?
I think probably tort reform, and then I think the third will be anybody's guess. And my hope and prayer that is that we can have a real conversation.
A guarantee that it gets kicked out?
I think tort reform will be one of the 3. You know,
right.
So I just would encourage when people think about this, to think about this in terms of the moral, not only in terms of the moral imperative, but then there is also an economic issue, and then there's an issue around race and ethnicity and the impact and the disparities that we see across the justice system. And just remember that this is also an issue around mass incarceration. So we can't talk about how we've gone from when I was a kid in the mid-70s to 300,000 people in prison to becoming, you know, 40 years later, becoming the nation with the largest prison population, relatively speaking, in the world. And we've added 2 million people to our prison population, and largely that's happened because of policy. Most of the people in prison right now across the country are in prison for drugs.
It's going to be an interesting debate there. I wish you the best with it, and we may talk about it some more. So,
yes.
Representative Vivian Flowers, thank you as always.
Okay,
good to see you.
Thank you so much.
We're back with a report from Northwest Arkansas. Northwest Arkansas Business Journal editor Paul Gatling joins me right after this.